The air conditioning at the Civil Affairs Bureau was running full blast. I was wearing the first white dress Mickey had ever given me. He was wearing a bracelet from his mistress. When the clerk asked whether we wanted mediation, we both shook our heads at the same time. Outside the glass window stood the milk tea shop we used to visit when we were dating. Now it had become a maternity and baby store. At 18, he stole the household register to marry me. At 28, he cheated and called it just a fling. The moment he received the divorce certificate, he suddenly broke down in tears. "Can we?" I slipped my documents into my bag, turned around, and walked away. Just like he taught me when he was teaching me how to ride a bicycle. Keep looking forward, don't look back. Chapter 1. The vibration of the plane's wheels touching down woke me up. I glanced at my phone. 4:10 in the afternoon. 3 full hours ahead of schedule. Mickey had texted me the night before. "Wifey, when you get back, I'll make up your birthday celebration." I never replied. I turned off the screen. Inside my bag were the contract I had just signed and an email from my boss about my promotion. I imagined the look on Mickey's face when I suddenly appeared in front of him. Just like when he was 18 and I showed up at his school without telling him. He had stared at me for several seconds before his eyes lit up. Then he rushed over, scooped me into his arms, and spun me around. The moment I pushed open the front door, a damp, stuffy smell greeted me. I set down my luggage and sniffed the air. Then I froze. Something felt wrong. Besides the cedar scent of Mickey's usual body wash, there was something else lingering in the air. Sweet. Almost sickly sweet. Like overripe fruit rotting in syrup. That scent definitely didn't belong to me. And it definitely didn't belong in my entryway. My bag slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a thud. The house was completely silent. I changed into my slippers and looked around my own home like a burglar. The living room was neat. The bed in the bedroom was perfectly made. Even the bathroom was dry. The sweet scent disappeared once I reached the middle of the living room. As if whoever had left it behind had only stood near the entrance for a moment. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of ice water. The glass was so cold it numbed my palm. The tangled mess in my mind seemed to cool down a little too. At exactly 7 o'clock, a key slid into the lock. The door opened. Mickey walked in carrying the dampness of the outside air. The moment he saw me, he visibly froze. The expression on his face stiffened for half a second before a perfectly natural smile spread across it. "Jessica, why are you back early? Wasn't your flight supposed to arrive tomorrow morning?" He set down his briefcase and opened his arms as he walked toward me, just as he always did, ready to hug me. I didn't move. Only when he was about to touch me did I seem to snap out of it and lean into his embrace. My face rested right beside the collar of his shirt. There it was. That sweet, cloying scent became unmistakably clear. My gaze drifted downward. On the inside of his white collar was a blurry patch of rose pink, a lipstick stain. Every lipstick on my vanity was classic red. He seemed completely unaware. He rubbed his cheek against my hair and laughed softly. "Miss me?" I pulled away from him and forced a tired smile. "Yeah, I'm exhausted. The project wrapped up early, so I changed my flight. Have you eaten? Want me to make you something?" "I already ate." I shook my head and casually pointed at his collar. "Why's that red? Did you get something on it?" He looked down and wiped it with his finger. The moment he saw the pink smudge, something flickered across his eyes. Then he laughed, sounding almost helpless. "Oh, that. We had a company team building event this afternoon. Things got pretty wild. It's probably lipstick from one of the female coworkers. You haven't met that crowd. Once they get going, they completely lose control." The lie flowed out effortlessly. As he spoke, he pulled off his shirt and tossed it into the laundry basket. "I'm covered in sweat. I'm gonna take a shower." The sound of running water soon filled the bathroom. I walked over to the laundry basket and picked up the shirt. The unfamiliar perfume nearly made me dizzy. I just stood there, holding it, until the water stopped running. Then I tossed the shirt back into the basket. That night, we curled up on the couch and watched a movie like we always did. His arm rested around my shoulders. His fingers lazily traced circles against my skin. Sometime after midnight, I felt the space beside me empty. Half asleep, I opened my eyes. A faint red glow flickered on the balcony. Mickey was standing there smoking. The glass door was closed. I couldn't hear anything, but I could see him holding his phone, his lips moving as he spoke. The wind lifted the hem of his pajamas. His face was turned sideways. The expression on it was gentle, patient, tender. I hadn't seen that look on his face in a very long time. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but at the end of the call, I watched him smile softly at the phone. His lips moved one last time. Even through the glass, I could read them clearly. He said, "Don't be difficult. I'll see you tomorrow." Chapter 2. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. Or rather, I hadn't really slept at all. Beside me, Mickey's breathing was steady and even. He was sleeping soundly, careful not to wake him. I slipped out of bed and headed into the study. I needed to pull up a contract draft from last week. My laptop was dead, and the charger was buried at the bottom of my suitcase. I couldn't be bothered digging it out. I remembered that Mickey's old laptop was always kept in the study. We shared a cloud account for storing family photos and shared files. I turned on his computer, entered the password, and logged into the cloud. Finding the contract took only a few minutes. Just as I was about to shut everything down, my eyes caught the recently deleted folder in the sidebar. For some reason, I clicked on it. There wasn't much inside. Mostly screenshots from movies and temporary work documents. But one image stood out immediately. It was a screenshot of an online shopping order. Like someone had casually taken a screenshot after placing an order and then casually deleted it. I opened it. At the top of the list was a Tiffany necklace, a delicate rose gold heart-shaped pendant. The price was followed by more zeros than I wanted to count. The next item was a VIP annual pass for 2 to Dream Valley theme park. At the bottom, my gaze froze. A box of birth control pills. A very common brand. The order status read, "Delivered." The screenshot had been taken on the 15th of last month, the same day Mickey had told me he was going on a 2-day business trip to a neighboring city. I sat frozen in the chair. It felt as though all the blood in my body had rushed straight to my head. A loud buzzing filled my ears. My heart pounded heavily and fast, slamming painfully against my chest. I pulled out my phone and took a clear photo of the screenshot on the computer screen. Then I moved the cursor and permanently deleted the image from the recently deleted folder. The screen went dark. My reflection stared back at me, expressionless. When I returned to the bedroom, Mickey had just rolled over, half asleep. He mumbled, "What time is it? Why are you up so early?" "It's still early. Go back to sleep." My voice sounded a little dry. I just needed to look something up. He hummed in response and drifted back to sleep. I stood beside the bed, looking at his back. I remembered the first winter after we moved in together. He hated the cold and always wrapped himself around me like an octopus, calling me his personal heater. At some point, though, he had started sleeping with his back to me. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. He was carrying a bouquet of flowers, beautifully wrapped. I passed a flower shop and they looked fresh, so I bought them. He handed them to me with a smile. "Consider it making up for yesterday's surprise." I accepted the bouquet. "Thanks." Then I turned to find a vase. The fragrance of the flowers was rich and sweet. It made my stomach churn. After arranging them, he walked over and wrapped his arms around me from behind. His chin rested in the crook of my neck. His hands started wandering. His lips brushed against my ear. "Wifey, it's been days since I've seen you." My body stiffened instantly. I grabbed the hand that was sliding downward and pushed him away with more force than necessary. "Not now." He paused. The smile on his face faded slightly. "What's wrong? Still not feeling well?" "Yeah." I lowered my eyes. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. "I think I'm still exhausted from yesterday. Haven't recovered yet. My head hurts." He stared at me for several seconds. Something in his gaze darkened. Finally, he let go. His voice cooled a little. "All right, get some rest." Then, he turned and walked into the living room, switching on the television. I remained standing there, staring at the bouquet in full bloom. My mind replayed that screenshot over and over again, and the tenderness practically dripping from his voice when he spoke on the balcony last night. The date on that screenshot was tomorrow. Chapter 3. The next day. I took a day off without telling Mickey. I watched him leave that morning, listened to the sound of him changing his shoes in the entryway, and then the soft click of the door closing behind him. The house fell completely silent. I changed into a simple t-shirt and jeans, put on a cap and a face mask, and hailed a taxi. Dream Valley. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, probably wondering why someone dressed like this was headed to an amusement park. I said nothing and stared out the window. The entrance was crowded. Most of the visitors were couples or families with children. The sunlight was a little harsh, and the music blasting through the park was almost overwhelming. I bought the cheapest ticket available and blended into the crowd. I had no real destination. I simply wandered along the main path, letting my eyes drift over the couples passing by. Inside, I felt numb, and underneath that numbness was a shameful hope I couldn't quite explain. Then I saw them, right beside an ice cream cart ahead of me. Mickey was wearing a light blue t-shirt and beige casual pants. I had never seen that outfit before. Beside him stood a young woman with her hair tied in a high bun. She wore a pink and white puff-sleeved dress, holding a rainbow-colored ice cream cone. She rose onto her tiptoes and playfully held it toward his mouth. Mickey laughed and tilted his head slightly to avoid it, but his eyes were filled with indulgence. He lifted a hand and casually wiped a dab of cream from the corner of her mouth with his thumb. The gesture was painfully familiar. He used to do the same thing for me after meals. My feet felt rooted to the ground. The girl turned her face. Sunlight illuminated her features clearly. It was her. 6 months ago, I had taken my car to one of Mickey's dealerships for maintenance. Mickey had been off work that day and came with me. This was the same girl. Back then, she had been wearing an intern's uniform, constantly following Mickey around and asking questions. Her eyes had sparkled as she repeated over and over, "Sir, you know so much." Later, she brought us water. As she walked past me, she suddenly stumbled. An entire cup of coffee spilled onto my dress. The white fabric was instantly stained with a large brown blotch. Her eyes had immediately reddened. She stood there flustered and helpless, her voice trembling as if she were about to cry. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Mickey had immediately grabbed napkins to help clean me up. His brows were furrowed. Yet when he spoke to her, his tone was remarkably gentle. "It's okay. Just be more careful next time." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. I had simply assumed the intern was clumsy. But now, looking at the young woman standing there in her pretty dress, youthful and radiant, acting spoiled in front of my husband, that cup of coffee probably hadn't been an accident. She was laughing as she said something to Mickey. Then her gaze casually swept across the crowd and landed on me. More than 10 yards separated us. People flowed constantly between us. The smile on her face faltered for a moment. Then the corners of her lips slowly curled upward. It was the smile of a winner. Her eyes locked onto mine. The challenge in them was naked and unmistakable. Then she reached out and wrapped herself even more tightly around Mickey's arm, practically pressing her entire body against him. Following her gaze, Mickey turned around. The moment he saw me, his expression froze. The ease and affection from moments ago vanished instantly. All the color drained from his face. I stood where I was. I didn't move. I didn't look away, across the noisy crowd. I simply looked at them, for about 5 seconds. Then I turned around, pushing through the sea of people. I headed toward the park exit. My pace was quick, but steady. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard Mickey shouting my name. The sound was swallowed by the blaring music and the noise of the crowd. Maybe I had imagined it. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. Chapter 4. When I got back from the amusement park, I tossed my cap and mask into the entryway. The house was quiet, just as quiet as it had been when I left that morning. I sat down on the couch and pulled out my phone. I found CEO Lopez in my contacts and called him. CEO Lopez was Mickey's most important client. He was also an old friend of Mickey's father and had watched Mickey grow up. He placed great importance on family values and often said that a man should build a family before building a career. The call connected quickly. CEO Lopez. "Hello, this is Jessica." "Jessica? What made you think of calling me?" His voice was warm and friendly. "I'm sorry to bother you. There's something about Mickey that I think you should know. If you're available, I'd like to speak with you in person." There was a brief pause. "Is it urgent?" "Yes, it is," I answered. We agreed to meet in a private room at a quiet tea house. When CEO Lopez arrived, I was already there. I poured him a cup of tea. "CEO Lopez, I'll get straight to the point." I took out my phone. opened the photos, and slid it across the table. I caught Mickey at an amusement park with another woman. This one is a screenshot of a purchase order. He bought her a necklace, annual passes to the amusement park, and birth control pills. The smile slowly disappeared from CEO Lopez's face. He picked up my phone and examined each image carefully. With every photo, his frown deepened. The girl is an intern at Mickey's company, I added quietly, leaning back in his chair. CEO Lopez looked at me with a dark expression. Jessica, you're telling me all this because… CEO Lopez, you've watched him grow up, and you've always been someone we deeply respect. I met his gaze calmly. I'm disappointed in Mickey, heartbroken. Even, the issues between us are mine to deal with. But what concerns me is whether this kind of personal conduct could affect how other partners view your company and your relationship with him if they were to find out. After all, integrity and responsibility matter. I paused. CEO Lopez's expression had grown increasingly grim. Then I continued. Personally, I think that if someone can be unfaithful and irresponsible toward his marriage and family, then his promises in business deserve a second look as well. Of course, that's only my personal concern. CEO Lopez remained silent for a long time. The only sound in the room was the faint bubbling of the tea kettle. Finally, he spoke. His voice carried restrained anger. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I never imagined Mickey would turn into someone like this. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling him right now. CEO Lopez. I stopped him. This is between Mickey and me. I'd like to handle it myself. I just felt that you deserved to know. CEO Lopez looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were complicated. Finally, he nodded. I understand, Jessica. You've been wronged. I didn't reply. I simply took back my phone. After leaving the tea house, I went straight home. A little after 8 that evening, the front door was violently shoved open. It slammed against the wall with a deafening bang. Mickey stormed inside. His face was ashen. His eyes were bloodshot. In just a few strides, he was standing in front of me. His chest rose and fell violently. Jessica, you went to see CEO Lopez? What the hell did you tell him? He was practically shouting. His voice trembled with rage. I was sitting at the dining table. A document lay in front of me. I looked up at him. My expression remained calm. Have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what happened today? CEO Lopez dragged me into his office and chewed me out for an entire hour. He said he's going to reevaluate the partnership with our company. What the hell are you trying to do? Chapter 5. He waved his arms wildly, completely losing control. I waited until he finished shouting before slowly standing up. Then I picked up the document from the table and held it out to him. Sign it. Breathing heavily, he lowered his head and looked at the words printed across the cover. Divorce agreement. His entire body stiffened. You're seriously divorcing me over this little shit? Jessica, are you kidding me? I was just confused for a while. I've already cut things off with her. Sign it. I pushed the agreement toward him again. My voice was flat and emotionless. I'm not signing it. He suddenly swung his hand, trying to knock the document away. I pulled it back too quickly for him to hit it. You're not signing? I looked directly into his eyes and spoke slowly. Fine. Then I'll send the amusement park photos and all those transfer records of yours to your parents. To every relative and friend you have. I'll let them see exactly what kind of man their perfect son really is. I paused before adding. And while I'm at it, I'll ask them whether they're disappointed in the son they raised. It was as if all the strength had been drained from Mickey's body. He staggered backward. Disbelief filled his face. His lips trembled, but no words came out. He stared at me. The hatred in his eyes was impossible to miss. A long moment passed. Then he snatched the agreement from my hand. Walking to the dining table, he grabbed a pen. He flipped to the final page and found the signature line. The pen pressed down so hard it nearly tore through the paper. Without hesitation, he scrawled his name across the page. Then he slammed the pen onto the table. Jessica, you're ruthless. The words were squeezed out through clenched teeth. I ignored him, picking up the signed agreement. I checked the signature carefully. My lawyer will contact you regarding the property division and the remaining procedures. When I finished speaking, I took the agreement and turned toward the bedroom. The door closed behind me. Leaving him alone in the living room. Chapter 6. Amelia's law firm was located in a bright office building. I sat across from her and slid a stack of documents across the desk. It's all here, the photos, transfer records, and shopping screenshots. Amelia picked up the documents and flipped through them page by page. Her expression grew colder with every sheet. She was dressed in a black suit today, her hair pulled back flawlessly. Scumbag. After finishing, she tossed the documents onto the desk and spat out the word, "I want a divorce." I looked at her. As fast as possible. Don't worry, leave it to me. She met my gaze. I'd known her for years. She had always been reliable. But Jessica, have you thought through the property division? I won't give up a single cent that's mine. I cut her off. He doesn't deserve it. Amelia nodded, her eyes sharp. Good. Then what about the money he transferred to Celine? Get it back. I answered. I know exactly how much it is. Amelia grabbed a pen and began writing rapidly on a sticky note. With this evidence, we can absolutely argue that he had no right to dispose of marital assets on his own. We'll send a lawyer's letter first. If she refuses to cooperate, we'll file a lawsuit. You handle it, I said. Amelia put down her pen and looked at me. Jessica, are you okay? I'm fine. I picked up the glass of water on her desk and took a sip. I just feel sick. After leaving Amelia's office, I went to the bank and requested 6 months of account statements. The printed pages were thick. I sat in the lobby and read through them line by line. Those unfamiliar transfers were like needles stabbing into my eyes. 50,000 every month, along with countless smaller transfers. Looking at those numbers, I felt nothing, just empty. My phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I answered. Hello? Celine's voice came from the other end. She sounded tearful, but it couldn't hide the sharp edge underneath. Jessica? Is that you? Yes. How dare you? How dare you have a lawyer send me a summons? Mickey gave me that money willingly. What right do you have to take it back? She was practically screaming. That money belongs to the marital estate. My voice remained calm. He had no authority to dispose of it on his own. You are legally obligated to return it. This is revenge. You just can't stand that Mickey treats me well. You old hag. If you couldn't keep your man, that's your own fault. I listened to her shouting without saying a word. After yelling for a while, she paused to catch her breath. Then her tone suddenly changed. A trace of smugness crept into it. Mickey said he feels sorry for me. That's why he wants to spend money on me. He said you're boring and rigid. He's been sick of you for ages. Those words. I spoke slowly. You can have him tell me himself. She choked on her own confidence. There was a brief silence. Then she started crying. Jessica, I know I was wrong. I really do. Can you withdraw the summons? I've already spent most of the money. How am I supposed to pay it back? That's your problem, I replied. How can you be so heartless? You're trying to ruin my life. She started screaming again. Mickey won't abandon me. He promised he'd protect me. Then go find him. I hung up, slipping my phone back into my bag. I returned my attention to the bank statements in my hands. The numbers suddenly looked blurry. I lifted a hand and rubbed my eyes. My fingertips came away dry. Chapter 7. The doorbell rang just as darkness was settling outside. I was sitting on the floor, sorting through the luggage I planned to move into a temporary apartment. Looking through the peephole, I saw Hector standing outside. What was Mickey's brother doing here? He was wearing a simple gray jacket, his brows slightly furrowed as usual, and carrying an insulated food bag. I opened the door. Jessica. The moment he saw me, his expression softened slightly. He lifted the bag in his hand. Mom made some dumplings and insisted I bring them over. She said they're your favorite. Thank you. I stepped aside. Come in. He walked inside and set the bag on the dining table. His eyes swept over the cardboard boxes scattered around the living room. Packing? Yeah. I closed the door and went to the kitchen to pour him a glass of water. He accepted it but didn't drink. Instead, his gaze settled on my face. You don't look well. How have you been lately? About the same. I sat down across from him. Where's Mickey? His voice grew heavier. I've been calling him, and either he doesn't answer or he brushes me off after a few words. Did you two have a fight? I looked at him but didn't answer immediately. He set down the glass and leaned forward. His tone became more serious. Jessica, tell me the truth. Did that idiot do something to you? I looked at Hector. He resembled Mickey by maybe 50 or 60%, but their temperaments couldn't have been more different. Mickey was impulsive and reckless. Hector was reserved, steady, and dependable. Growing up, whenever Mickey and I argued, Hector almost always took my side, like a real older brother. It's not a fight, I finally said. My voice was flat. He cheated. Hector's expression froze, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. He asked again, what? He cheated. I repeated clearly, with an intern named Celine. For about 6 months, I found out. Hector shot to his feet. The chair legs scraped harshly against the floor. His face instantly turned livid. His fists clenched tightly. When did this happen? His voice rose sharply, filled with disbelief and fury. Where is she? Where's Mickey? I don't know, I answered. Probably at the apartment he rented for her. Son of a bitch. Hector cursed under his breath. His chest heaved violently. Jessica. I didn't know. If I had known earlier. Before he could finish, he suddenly turned and stormed toward the door. Where are you going? I asked. To find that bastard. He didn't even look back. The words were squeezed through gritted teeth. At that exact moment, the front door opened from the outside. A key turned in the lock. Mickey stepped inside. His face was tired and impatient. The moment he spotted Hector, he froze. Bro? What are you doing here? Without saying a word, Hector lunged forward. He grabbed Mickey by the collar and drove a vicious punch straight into his face. Caught completely off guard, Mickey staggered backward into the doorframe. Blood immediately appeared at the corner of his mouth. Are you even human anymore? Hector roared, gripping his collar. His eyes were terrifyingly red. What the hell did Jessica ever do to deserve this? How could you do something this disgusting? Mickey shook his head and wiped the blood from his lip. When his gaze landed on me, his expression instantly turned vicious. He shoved Hector away. And who the hell are you to hit me? My business is none of yours. I'm your brother. If I don't deal with you, who will? Hector pointed at him. His finger was trembling with rage. Look at what you've done. Can you even face Jessica after this? I wronged her. Mickey exploded. He pointed at me while shouting at Hector. She ran to my most important client and filled his head with bullshit. She wants a divorce. She wants every cent of that money back. She'd love nothing more than to destroy me. And that's your perfect Jessica? That's bullshit. The veins on Hector's forehead bulged. If you hadn't done those filthy things, would she have had anything to tell him? You couldn't keep it in your pants. And now you're blaming everyone else? So what if I was just having a little fun with her? Mickey snapped without thinking. Celine is young. She's sweet. She actually knows how to make me happy. Unlike some people who are always so stiff and uptight, acting reluctant every time I touch them. Being with Jessica is exhausting. The words struck like a needle, sharp, sudden, straight through my heart. So all the years I'd spent working for this family had somehow become my fault. Hector completely lost his temper. He swung another punch. I'll teach you to keep your mouth shut. This time Mickey was ready. He turned his head and dodged. The next second, the two brothers were locked in a fight. The narrow entryway erupted into chaos. Two grown men crashed into walls and furniture, the sounds of impacts echoing throughout the apartment. Chapter 8. I didn't move. I simply stood there and watched the defiance and hostility on Mickey's face. In the end, Hector gained the upper hand. He pinned Mickey firmly against the wall, breathing heavily. Apologize. Apologize to Jessica. Mickey tilted his head away stubbornly. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He didn't say a word. Are you going to apologize or not? Hector slammed him against the wall again. Mickey suddenly turned his head. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. There was no remorse in them. Only resentment. Only defiance. I didn't do anything wrong, he roared. I was just having some fun. Do whatever the hell you want. Looking at him, the last trace of hope in Hector's eyes finally died. Slowly, he released his grip, as though every ounce of strength had left him. He took 2 steps back, then looked at Mickey and said, word by word, "Mickey, you're rotten to the core." Mickey slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor. His head hung low. All he did was breathe heavily. Hector didn't look at him again. Instead, he walked over to me. His own lip was split. There were bruises on his face. His eyes looked exhausted and heavy. "Jessica." His voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry. My family failed you." He lifted a hand as if he wanted to touch my shoulder. But in the end, it dropped helplessly back to his side. I should have kept him in line. After saying that, he didn't stay any longer. He opened the door and left. I said nothing. I simply returned to the living room and continued packing my luggage. Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, I arrived at Tessera Group's conference room with my team right on schedule. It was one of the company's most important projects of the year. The bidding presentation would begin at 10. We had only been seated a short while when the conference room door opened again. Mickey walked in with 2 colleagues. The moment he saw me, his steps noticeably faltered. His expression darkened. He looked thinner. Dark circles hung heavily beneath his eyes. Even his suit seemed loose on him. Avoiding my gaze, he silently took a seat across from me. A few minutes later, CEO Lee of Tessera entered with his team. After some brief greetings, the bidding session officially began. Mickey's company presented first. He stood and walked to the projection screen. At first, everything went relatively smoothly, but when he reached the core proposal, his speech became noticeably faster. Several figures were mumbled so vaguely they were difficult to understand. A few people in the audience frowned. CEO Lee interrupted him. "Manager Mickey, this cost estimate differs by 15% from the preliminary proposal your company submitted earlier. Can you explain the reason for that discrepancy?" Mickey froze. He lowered his head and hurriedly flipped through his documents. The papers rustled loudly. He licked his cracked lips and attempted an explanation, but his reasoning quickly became confused. Several statements contradicted each other. I listened quietly, and suddenly remembered the early days of his startup. Whenever he ran into a difficult proposal, he would carry his laptop into my study. "Jessica, help me straighten out the logic here. Wifey, something feels off about this data model. You've got a sharp eye. Can you take a look?" Back then, he relied on me, trusted me, like an affectionate golden retriever that always wanted to stay close. Now he stood at the front of the room, underprepared, distracted, struggling to keep up. CEO Lee's expression darkened slightly, but he didn't comment further. He simply gestured for Mickey to continue. Chapter 9. It was our team's turn. I stood up and took the laser pointer from my assistant. The screen lit up with the presentation we had spent weeks preparing. I walked everyone through it slide by slide. Every figure was precise. Every piece of logic connected seamlessly to the next. I could see the change in the expressions of the Tessera executives. Their eyes lit up. Some had already lowered their heads and begun taking notes. Throughout the entire presentation, I never looked at Mickey once, but from the corner of my eye, I could see him sitting across from me. His body was rigid. His fingers unconsciously tightened around the pen in front of him. When I finished, I gave a slight bow. "That concludes our proposal. Thank you." The conference room fell silent for a few seconds. Then CEO Lee started applauding. A smile of approval appeared on his face as he looked at me. "Director Jessica's team certainly lives up to its reputation. You came thoroughly prepared, and every detail has been carefully considered." I smiled politely. "You're too kind, CEO Lee. We're simply doing our job." CEO Lee nodded. His gaze swept across the room before casually settling on me. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone could hear it clearly. "We only feel comfortable working with professionals who are responsible and dependable, like Director Jessica." Everyone in the room understood what he meant. The meeting ended. People gradually stood and began leaving. I gathered my documents. Across the table, Mickey remained seated, motionless. I picked up my bag and prepared to leave. As I passed him, he suddenly spoke in a low voice. It was hoarse, filled with suppressed emotion. "Feeling pretty proud of yourself right now?" I stopped. For the first time, I turned and looked directly at him. His eyes were bloodshot. "I'm just doing my job." After saying that, I walked away with my team. The conference room door closed behind me. cutting off whatever gaze he might have been sending my way. A little after 5 that afternoon, at the coffee shop beneath our office building, I had arranged to meet Amelia to discuss the latest developments in the divorce settlement. I had just stepped into the lobby when someone rose from a sofa in the waiting area and blocked my path. It was Celine. She wasn't wearing makeup today. Her face looked pale. Her eyes were swollen and red. She wore a simple white dress. Compared to the amusement park, she looked much more haggard. Yet there was a stubborn determination in her eyes, as though she had decided to risk everything. Jessica. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Can we talk? I stopped and looked at her. We have nothing to discuss. If you have something to say, talk to my lawyer. She bit her lip. One hand unconsciously moved to her lower abdomen. It's about the baby. I watched the gesture, but said nothing. At that moment, Amelia walked in through the entrance. Seeing the situation, she immediately came to my side and looked at Celine warily. Celine acted as if Amelia wasn't there. Her eyes remained fixed on me. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Then she held it out. I'm pregnant. Her voice trembled slightly. It's Mickey's. I accepted the paper and unfolded it. It was a hospital pregnancy report. Across the top were the words, intrauterine pregnancy, approximately 6 weeks. Amelia spoke coldly from beside me. Anyone can print something like that at a copy shop. Celine whipped her head toward Amelia. Her eyes sharpened immediately. This is from a legitimate hospital. You can verify it if you want. Then she turned back to me. Her voice became urgent, almost triumphant. When Mickey found out, he panicked a little, but he told me he'd take responsibility. He said he wouldn't let his child suffer. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, yet every word came through clearly. Jessica, aren't you two getting divorced? Why don't you just let us be together? Even if you don't care about him, you should at least think about the baby. A child shouldn't grow up without a father. Apparently, she still didn't know that the divorce had already been finalized. I looked down at the blurry ultrasound image on the report, the tiny gestational sac, and suddenly remembered the box of birth control pills in that cloud storage screenshot. The one marked, delivered. Chapter 10. The timing did seem to line up. What did Mickey say? I asked, folding the report and handing it back to her. She grabbed it immediately, clutching it like a lifeline. He was scared at first, but he said he'd handle everything. He promised he'd take responsibility for me and the baby. She emphasized every word. He felt sorry for me. He said I'm still young, and something like this would naturally scare me. He said he couldn't just abandon me. Oh, I nodded and looked at her flushed cheeks. Then are you sure? I paused. My gaze settled calmly on her eyes. That the baby is definitely Mickey's? The color drained from Celine's face instantly. Her eyes widened, as if she had been stabbed by something invisible. Her lips trembled. For a long moment, not a single word came out. I didn't look at her again. Instead, I turned to Amelia. Let's go. Amelia shot Celine a cold glance before following me out. After we had walked several steps, I heard Celine's sharp, tearful voice behind us. It is Mickey's. It's his. What right do you have not to believe me? I didn't turn around. 3 days later, I was sitting in the office of a private investigator recommended by Amelia. The man across from me, dressed in a polo shirt, slid a document envelope across the desk. Miss Jessica, everything you requested is in there. I opened the envelope. Inside were several photographs and a stack of printed pages. The photos showed Celine with different men. They stood close together, behaving intimately. Restaurants, outside bars. One photo had been taken beside a sports car. The man in the driver's seat appeared to be in his 40s. Based on our investigation, the investigator said calmly, Miss Celine has a rather active social life. Besides your husband, Mickey, she has maintained close relationships with at least 3 other men. One is a regular customer at Phantom Bar. Another is Lu Mingxian, the heir of Xinda Technology. I flipped through the printed documents. They were screenshots of Celine's WeChat transfer records from the past several months. The payment notes varied wildly. Buy yourself a new dress. Sweetheart. Miss you. Happy birthday. My little temptress. The senders all had different names and profile pictures. The amounts ranged from 520 to well over 10,000. The timeline overlapped almost perfectly with the period she had been seeing Mickey. There was another document. A genuine medical record from a private hospital dated the previous week. Diagnosis: gastroenteritis. No pregnancy. None at all. This pregnancy report. The investigator pointed to the copy I had brought. We verified it. It's fake. The hospital seal and formatting are both incorrect. Thank you for your work. I returned everything to the envelope. I'll transfer the remaining payment to your account. Much appreciated. I didn't leave immediately. Instead, I sat in my car and went through the photographs and records again. The intimate pictures. The shameless transfer notes. The entire thing felt like some ridiculous farce. I remembered the way Mickey had shouted at me because of her. How fiercely he had defended her. How desperately he had tried to protect her. It was laughable. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. Then I opened my chat with Mickey. The last message he had sent me was 2 days ago. He had asked whether I could withdraw the lawsuit. Stop pursuing Celine. She's just a young girl. Her life isn't easy. I stared at the message. Then my fingers moved across the screen. No words. I simply sent the photos. Original quality. One after another. Sent successfully. I closed the chat window, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and started the car. I knew he would see them, and I knew exactly what his expression would look like when he did. Chapter 11. A little after 11 that night. I had just finished showering when I heard shouting from downstairs. The noise was mixed with slurred yelling. The voice sounded familiar. I walked to the window and pulled back a corner of the curtain. Under the halo of the streetlight below, Mickey stood swaying unsteadily. His tie hung crooked around his neck. His suit jacket dangled from one hand, tilting his head back. He shouted toward my window. Jessica! Jessica! Come down! A security guard approached him and tried to persuade him to leave. Sir, please stop shouting. You're disturbing the other residents. Get lost! Mickey shoved the guard away. His body lurched dangerously, almost sending him to the ground. He caught himself on a railing and continued shouting. Jessica! I know you're still awake. Come down. We need to talk. His voice was hoarse and thick with alcohol. I let the curtain fall and returned to the living room. The shouting continued. The security guard seemed unable to do anything about him. About 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang, rapid, chaotic, accompanied by loud pounding on the door. Jessica! Open the door! Open the damn door! He shouted from outside. I walked over and looked through the peephole. He was practically collapsed against the door. His hair was a mess. His eyes were bloodshot. Tear tracks still stained his face. He looked utterly pathetic. I didn't open the door. Jessica. I was wrong. I was really wrong. His voice suddenly dropped. It trembled with tears. His fist tapped weakly against the door. Celine lied to me. She's a fucking liar. He pressed his forehead against the door. His voice came in broken fragments. I was stupid. I let her fool me. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to lose this family. Outside the door, he kept rambling. One moment he cursed Celine. The next he talked about regret. Then he begged for forgiveness. Jessica, let's not get divorced. Please. I'll never do it again. I'll listen to everything you say from now on. We can go back to how things used to be. His voice cracked. I can't live without you. I leaned against the wall on the other side of the door and listened quietly. I remembered when he was 17. He had gotten into a fight and come looking for me afterward. Eyes red from holding back tears. Like a soaked puppy caught in the rain. He had buried his face against my neck and muttered, Jessica, you're all I have. Back then, my heart had genuinely ached for him. Now, the crying outside my door only felt noisy. His phone rang. He answered it and immediately shouted into the receiver. Get lost. All of you. Just leave me the hell alone. Don't bother me. He hung up, then started pounding on the door again. Jessica. Open the door. Look at me. I know you still care about me. After all these years, I listened to him repeat the same words over and over, until his voice gradually weakened, until it dissolved into muffled sobs. Finally, I heard the sound of his body sliding down the door. Then only broken crying remained. I turned away, ignoring everything happening outside. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. The next morning, when I left for work, he was gone. Only a small dried stain remained beside the street lamp below. It looked like someone had thrown up there during the night. Chapter 12. A week later, Amelia came over to my place for coffee. Celine dropped out of school. Amelia took a sip of her coffee, her tone casual. I looked up at her. I don't know all the details, but apparently someone reported her. Conduct issues, forged documents, things like that. Amelia set down her cup. The school had plenty of evidence. She couldn't stay, so she withdrew on her own. After a brief pause, she added, "And that Shinda technology heir she was involved with, Lu Mingxian? He dumped her too, from what I heard. His family found out about everything and was furious. They sent him overseas immediately." I nodded but said nothing. The outcome wasn't surprising. Every step she had taken was like dancing on the edge of a cliff. A few days later, I went to a building materials market on the west side of the city. I was looking for materials to renovate my house. At one corner of the market, I saw Celine. She didn't see me. She was wearing an ill-fitting promotional uniform with a brand logo printed on it. Struggling, she dragged a heavy box of tile samples across the floor. Her hair was messy. The ponytail she had tied up looked frizzy and unkempt. Without her carefully applied makeup, she appeared exhausted. Even her lips were dry and cracked. As she carried the box, her steps wavered slightly. Nearby, a middle-aged man who seemed to be the store owner frowned and barked at her. "Be careful. If you break anything, it'll come out of your paycheck. Stop dragging your feet." Keeping her head lowered, she didn't argue. She carried the box to its designated spot. Then she straightened up and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Breathing heavily, she stared blankly at the cluttered aisle stretching through the market. The lively, coquettish charm she had worn at the amusement park was completely gone. All that remained was the numb exhaustion of someone worn down by life. I watched for a moment. Then I turned and walked away. She never noticed me, just as she had once barged into my life, and then exited it in humiliation, quietly, without a sound. Chapter 13. Monday afternoon. There was a noticeable buzz in the office. My assistant, Xiao Chen, came in carrying a stack of documents, barely able to hide her excitement. "Director Jessica, Tessera just sent over the preliminary letter of intent. Legal is already reviewing it. Follow the normal process." I took the documents and flipped open the first page. The paper was bright white. The project value printed on it was followed by more zeros than most people would ever see. "This is amazing. Director Jessica." Xiao Chen's voice practically bounced with excitement. "We're definitely going to exceed our quarterly targets. Everyone wants to go out for dinner tonight to celebrate. You have to come." I nodded. That was my answer. "You all go ahead." I looked at her. "I'm tired tonight. I'd like to get home early and rest." Put the bill on the department account. A trace of disappointment flashed across her face, but she quickly smiled again. "All right. Honestly, Director Jessica, you really should get some rest. You've worked harder than anyone these past few months. Then we'll enjoy ourselves without feeling guilty." She left cheerfully, closing the door behind her. I set my phone down and returned my attention to the contract. Just then, my phone rang. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then a familiar voice came through. Hoarse, unusually low. "Jessica." It was Hector. Something sounded wrong. "Hector?" I frowned slightly. "What's happened?" A few more seconds passed. His breathing sounded heavy, as if it took all his strength to say the words. "My mother passed away this morning." My fingers tightened unconsciously around the phone. "When?" My voice remained surprisingly steady. "A little after 6. At the hospital. She passed in her sleep." It was peaceful. His voice caught. "The memorial service is the morning after tomorrow, at Nanshan Funeral Home." "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll be there." "Thank you." Hector spoke softly before hanging up. The line went dead. The elderly woman who used to hold my hand and remind me to take good care of my marriage with Mickey was gone. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The funeral home smelled of disinfectant and chrysanthemums. I arrived 20 minutes early, wearing a black dress that fell just below my knees. Mickey's mother lay among the flowers. Her expression looked peaceful. Mickey stood at the front of the family reception area. His back was stiff. His hair was disheveled. Deep wrinkles creased the shoulders of his suit jacket. Mechanically, he shook hands with the people who came to pay their respects. His eyes were hollow. I walked to the registration table and signed my name. The aunt handling the guest book looked up and froze when she saw me. Then she lowered her voice. Jessica came. That's thoughtful of you. I nodded politely and moved toward the back of the memorial hall. Several relatives noticed me. They exchanged glances and whispered among themselves. Their expressions were complicated. The ceremony began. Mournful music drifted through the hall. When it was time for the family remarks, Mickey walked to the podium on unsteady legs. The paper in his hands shook violently. His voice was rough and broken. Several times he choked up and couldn't continue. He lowered his head and wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. Soft sighs rose from the audience. When the funeral ended, the crowd slowly began to move. I approached Mickey's father and bowed slightly. Please accept my condolences. The old man's eyes were swollen and red. When he saw me, his lips trembled. He reached out and patted my shoulder heavily. Good girl, you've been through so much. I noticed the water dispenser in the corner had run out, so I replaced the bottle. Several elderly relatives were sitting nearby. I refilled their tea while I was there. Jessica is still as considerate as ever. One of the aunts took my hand. Even at a time like this, she's still thinking about everyone else. Not far away, Mickey watched everything. He watched me speaking quietly with relatives. He watched me lead an exhausted, crying child to a chair and help him sit down. The muscles in his face remained tightly clenched. When the staff carried out the urn, everyone gathered around. I remained at the edge of the crowd. I watched Mickey receive the wooden box with trembling hands. He pulled it tightly against his chest and bent forward. Then he lifted his head. Across the shifting crowd, his eyes suddenly met mine. My expression didn't change. I simply looked at him, looked at the man who had completely fallen apart in front of me, as if burned. He immediately looked away. His arms tightened around the urn. The knuckles of his fingers turned white. Chapter 14. After the funeral, friends and relatives gradually drifted away. I stood on the steps outside the funeral home, waiting for Amelia to pick me up. The evening wind carried a slight chill, sweeping a few fallen chrysanthemum petals into the air. Mickey walked out from inside, his steps unsteady. He stopped in front of me. He was still wearing that wrinkled black suit. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face carried an almost pleading expression. Jessica, he spoke, his voice hoarse. Can we talk? I said nothing and looked at him. He licked his cracked lips, as if gathering all his courage. I know I was wrong, terribly wrong. Mom's gone, and only now do I truly feel like there's nothing left. His voice caught in his throat. I regret it. Jessica, I really do. I shouldn't have lost my mind. I shouldn't have said those things to you. I shouldn't have. He stepped closer. Do you remember? The first year we were together. That winter was freezing. I rode my scooter to pick you up from work. You tucked your hands into my pockets. Your face was red from the cold, but you kept smiling and saying you weren't cold at all. We were so happy back then. We had nothing, but our hearts felt full. His eyes shimmered with tears as he stared at me. 10 years. We've come this far. We've endured so much together. Now that we finally have everything. Jessica, I really know I was wrong. I swear it'll never happen again. Let's not get divorced, okay? Let's start over. I'll change. I'll change anything. From now on, I'll listen to everything you say. Mom is watching from above. She'd want us to be happy too. He spoke with deep emotion. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't even bother wiping them away. He just looked at me like a child who had lost his most precious toy, desperately begging for it back. I listened quietly until he finished speaking and watched him cry. The wind brushed past, and a few strands of hair swept across my eyes, making them itch. I raised a hand and slowly tucked my hair behind my ear. Then I looked into his eyes, completely calm. Mickey, the way you are right now disgusts me. The expression on his face froze instantly. The tears were still hanging on his cheeks. The eyes that had been filled with pleading moments ago suddenly became hollow. Then, Little by little, they shattered. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. It was as if all the bones had been pulled from his body. He swayed and nearly lost his balance. I didn't look at him again. I turned and walked down the steps. Amelia's car had just pulled up not far away, its headlights glowing in the dusk. I opened the door and got in. "Let's go," I said. The car pulled away. In the rearview mirror, the figure in the black suit was still standing rigidly on the steps of the funeral home, growing smaller and smaller, until he finally disappeared into the fading evening light. Chapter 15. On Friday afternoon, my team and I were in the conference room for a project kickoff meeting. It was for the project we had won during the last bidding conference. The client company had assigned a new project lead. This is Romeo, recently transferred from our headquarters. He'll be directly responsible for this project from now on. Their manager made the introduction. Romeo stood up and shook my hand. He looked to be around 35 or 36, wearing a well-fitted navy blue shirt without a tie. A simple watch rested on his wrist. "Director Jessica, I've heard a lot about you." He smiled, his eyes bright and clear, carrying just the right amount of admiration. "Your presentation at the bidding conference was outstanding." "You flatter me, Romeo." I withdrew my hand. "Let's begin." The meeting went very smoothly. Romeo wasn't a man of many words. The pace was brisk, and everything was handled efficiently. When the meeting ended, both sides began packing up their materials. Romeo walked over to me and said naturally, "Director Jessica has a very unique perspective on this industry. I hope we'll have a pleasant collaboration moving forward." "Likewise." I nodded. "It happens to be dinner time." He glanced at his watch, his tone casual. "I wonder if I could have the honor of treating Director Jessica to a simple meal? We could also discuss some details regarding the next phase of the project." I hesitated briefly. I didn't have any other plans that afternoon, so I agreed. We didn't go far, choosing a Cantonese restaurant near the company. The atmosphere was quiet, and the food was light and refined. During dinner, we mostly talked about work, industry trends, and potential challenges the project might encounter. Romeo was knowledgeable about a wide range of subjects. He spoke clearly and logically, occasionally adding a touch of humor that kept the conversation engaging. "I heard Director Jessica graduated from XX University?" He scooped up a spoonful of soup and naturally shifted the topic. "Yes, that was many years ago. Then we're alumni." He smiled, faint lines appearing at the corners of his eyes. "Though I'm a few years ahead of you. So technically, I'm your senior." "What a coincidence." I smiled. "It really is." He nodded and looked into my eyes, his tone sincere. "We never had the chance to meet at school. Now we're working together. I suppose that's fate." After dinner, he insisted on driving me home. The car was a black SUV, spotless inside, carrying a subtle woody fragrance. He stopped beneath my apartment building. "Thank you, Romeo. I enjoyed our conversation today." I unfastened my seatbelt. "The pleasure was mine." He inclined his head slightly. "See you at next week's project launch meeting." I pushed open the door and stepped out. He also got out of the driver's seat. "I'll wait until you're inside." He stood beside the car as the night breeze stirred a few strands of hair across his forehead. I nodded and turned toward the apartment entrance. Just as I stepped onto the stairs, a figure suddenly lunged out from the shadows. A strong smell of alcohol hit me as a hand clamped down hard on my wrist. Startled, I looked up. It was Mickey. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He stared at me, then abruptly turned toward the SUV that hadn't yet driven away and toward Romeo standing beside it. His voice was twisted by both anger and alcohol. "Who is he?" "Jessica. Who the hell is that guy? We're not even fully divorced yet, and you're already in such a hurry to find your next man?" "Huh?" Mickey's grip on my wrist was like a vice. His alcoholic breath hit my face. I tried to shake him off, but he only tightened his hold, his nails nearly digging into my skin. "Let go." My voice turned cold. "No!" He growled, his eyes frighteningly red. "Jessica, you've got some nerve. My mom hasn't even been gone that long, and you're already so desperate for company? Or were you two hooking up long before this?" "Huh?" His voice echoed loudly through the quiet night. Lights began turning on in nearby apartment windows. "Mickey, you're drunk. Stop making a scene." I tried to calm him down. I'm making a scene? Am I the one making a scene? Or are you the shameless one? His free hand waved wildly as he pointed toward Romeo. Driving a luxury car and bringing you home? Pretty attentive, isn't he? Does he know you're not even divorced yet? Does he know you're somebody else's leftovers? Chapter 16. Mickey! I cut him off sharply, a wave of nausea churning in my stomach. Romeo walked over, his steps steady and composed. He stopped a few feet away and looked calmly at Mickey. Sir, please let go of her. Mickey whipped his head around and glared at Romeo as if he had finally found someone to vent his anger on. Who the hell are you? Get lost. This is between me and my wife. As far as I know, you're in the middle of a divorce. Romeo's voice remained calm, but it carried an undeniable authority. Let go of her immediately, or I'll call the police. The police? Go ahead and call them. Mickey sneered, but a flicker of panic flashed across his eyes. His grip on my wrist loosened slightly. Who are you trying to scare? Taking advantage of his distraction, I yanked my hand free. A bright red mark had already formed around my wrist. Then I slapped him across the face. Are you done? I asked. He turned his head and looked at the mark on my wrist. The bravado he'd been clinging to deflated like a punctured balloon. Jessica, his voice softened into a plea. Don't do this. Let's not get divorced, okay? I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. He tried to step closer again, without drawing attention to it. Romeo shifted slightly and placed himself between us. Director Jessica, would you like me to walk you upstairs? He asked, completely ignoring Mickey. No, thank you. I turned, swiped my access card, and entered the building. I didn't go upstairs immediately. Instead, I stood in the lobby and looked outside through the glass doors. Romeo said something else to Mickey. His voice was too low for me to hear. Then he got back into his car and drove away. Only Mickey remained beneath the streetlight. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped. After a long while, he suddenly raised his fist and slammed it hard into the lamppost beside him. Then, as if every last bit of strength had drained from his body, he crouched down and buried his face in his arms. I looked away and headed for the elevator. Later that night, I could intermittently hear his muffled sobs, drunken curses, and the sound of bottles rolling across the pavement below. It went on for a very long time. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, its screen glowing with a faint blue light. 3 in the morning. I picked it up and saw Taylor's name. Hello? My voice was thick with sleep. Jessica. Taylor sounded exhausted. The background noise carried the unmistakable bustle of a hospital. Sorry for calling so late. Mickey has alcohol poisoning. They had to pump his stomach. He's in a hospital room now, and he's not being very cooperative. Could you come over? I was silent for a few seconds. Which hospital? I asked. City 2nd Hospital, 3rd floor of the emergency building. Got it. Half an hour later, I pushed open the door to the hospital room. The smell of disinfectant was strong. Mickey lay in the bed nearest the door, his face pale and ashen, and 4 was connected to the back of his hand. His eyes were closed, his brows were tightly furrowed, and his lips were dry and cracked. Taylor stood beside the bed, looking helpless. When he saw me enter, he seemed relieved, though a little awkward. Jessica, you came. He lowered his voice. He finally settled down and fell asleep. I walked to the foot of the bed and looked at Mickey. Taylor rubbed his hands together. The doctor said this one was pretty serious. If he keeps drinking like this, it's not going to end well. He's been calling your name the whole time. I thought maybe you could talk some sense into him. I didn't respond. Chapter 17. Mickey stirred in the hospital bed and slowly opened his eyes. At first, his gaze was unfocused. The moment he saw me, his eyes suddenly sharpened. A flicker of hope flashed across them, only to be swallowed by even deeper pain. Jessica. His voice was hoarse and weak. He struggled to sit up, but Taylor pressed him back down. Don't move. You're still on in 4. Mickey ignored him. His eyes remained locked on me as he stretched out a hand, trying to grasp something. You came. I knew you still cared about me, didn't you? His fingers reached helplessly through the air. I took a step forward, avoiding his outstretched hand, and stopped where he could see me clearly. Taylor called and said you were about to die. I looked into his eyes, my voice calm and completely flat. So I came to take a look. The hope in his eyes flickered like a candle in the wind. I continued. Next Wednesday, 9 o'clock in the morning, Civil Affairs Bureau. Don't be late. The color instantly drained from Mickey's face. His lips trembled as he stared at me in disbelief. That's all you wanted to say to me? His voice shook. I'm in this condition, Jessica. Don't you feel even a little? Mickey. I cut him off. My tone remained calm, but every word was crystal clear. Listen carefully. I paused, making sure he heard every syllable. I came here for one reason only, to tell you this in person. I want a divorcee, not a widow. Next time, whether you live or die won't be my concern. After saying that, I didn't bother looking at the expression on his face. I turned and walked away. Jessica, he called after me, his voice raw with despair. I didn't look back. I walked straight out of the room and closed the door behind me. Chapter 18. The Civil Affairs Bureau was crowded, and the air inside felt stuffy. I found a seat near the side and watched the numbers on the cue screen continue to change. Mickey arrived more than 10 minutes late. He pushed through the door, looked around, spotted me, and slowly walked over before taking the empty seat beside me. He didn't speak, neither did I. A single seat separated us. He had lost a lot of weight. His suit hung loosely on his frame. Unshaven stubble covered his jaw, and a faint smell of cigarettes lingered around him. He kept his head lowered, staring at the tips of his shoes. Then our number was called. I stood up. He stood as well. We walked to the designated counter and sat side by side. The clerk, a woman in her 40s, expressionless, handed each of us a form. We picked up our pens and filled them out in silence. When everything was completed, she pushed 2 small dark red booklets toward us. I picked up mine. The cover had a matte texture with gold lettering embossed on it. It felt surprisingly light. Mickey stared at his booklet. His fingers gripped it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. We stood and left the counter. When we reached the entrance hall, the sunlight outside was almost blinding. I stopped, slipped the divorce certificate into my bag, and adjusted the strap on my shoulder. Behind me, Mickey finally spoke. Jessica. I turned to look at him. His lips moved. His eyes were slightly red. After struggling for a long moment, he finally forced out the words with immense difficulty. I'm sorry. I looked at him for about 2 or 3 seconds. Then I turned around, walked down the steps of the Civil Affairs Bureau, and disappeared into the flow of people on the street, without looking back. By the time the plane landed, it was raining in Reykjavik. Gray clouds hung low overhead. The air was cold and clean, sharp enough to sting my lungs when I breathed it in. I rented a 4-wheel drive vehicle and drove along the coastal highway. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. On both sides of the road stretched endless moss-covered fields, thick and green like a vast carpet. After driving for a long time, I saw a sign pointing toward the black sand beach. I parked the car and walked down. The sky was a gloomy gray. The ocean was an even deeper gray. The beach truly was black sand. Black pebbles, stretching all the way to the horizon. Huge waves crashed against the shore again and again, their deep, powerful roars echoing through the air. The wind was fierce. It whipped my coat and tossed my hair in every direction. I pulled up my collar, shoved my hands into my pockets, and walked slowly along the shoreline. The black sand felt rough beneath my feet. Occasionally, icy seawater rushed over my shoes, sending a bone-deep chill through me. There was almost no one around. Eventually, I stopped beside a smooth black boulder polished by countless tides. From the inner pocket of my coat, I took out a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside was my wedding ring. Mickey had saved money for a long time to buy it all those years ago. Back then, his hands had trembled with nervousness as he slipped it onto my finger. His eyes had shone so brightly. He had said, Jessica, I'll treat you well for the rest of my life. I removed the ring from the box. A platinum band, a tiny diamond. Under the gloomy daylight, it held almost no sparkle. I clenched it in my palm for a moment. Cold. Then I raised my arm and threw it as hard as I could. The ring traced a small silver arc through the air before falling into the churning gray waves. It vanished instantly, without even a splash. as if it had never existed at all. I stood there looking at the sea for a long time. The wind numbed my face. Eventually, the rain stopped. A crack opened in the clouds, and sunlight streamed through, illuminating a distant glacier, the white glacier, the black beach, the gray sea. For a moment, the beauty felt almost unreal. I stood there until my legs began to ache. Only then did I turn and walk back. I got into the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the black sand beach grew farther and farther away. My mind was empty, completely empty. And yet, somehow, the weight that had been lodged inside me for so long no longer felt quite as heavy. Chapter 19. The air inside the International Convention Center carried the distinct chill of central air conditioning. I sat in the guests section, watching the giant LED screen on the stage. The host was introducing the next speaker. Please welcome Ms. Jessica. I adjusted the collar of my suit jacket and walked onto the stage. The lights were a little blinding. Below me stretched a sea of faces. I adjusted the microphone and glanced across the audience. When my gaze reached the middle rows, I paused briefly. Mickey was sitting there. He wore a poorly fitted gray suit and sat with his head lowered, absent-mindedly spinning a pen between his fingers. He seemed to shrink into his seat, completely out of place among the attentive audience around him. He had lost a frightening amount of weight. His cheekbones protruded sharply, and his complexion carried an unhealthy pallor. For a brief moment, our eyes met. As if burned, he immediately looked away. His fingers tightened, and the pen nearly slipped from his hand. Lowering his head, he refused to look toward the stage again. My expression remained unchanged. I continued my presentation without missing a beat. Not even my speaking pace changed. When I finished, applause filled the hall. I gave a slight bow and stepped off the stage. During the coffee break, people gathered in small groups, chatting over coffee. Romeo approached carrying 2 bottles of water and handed one to me. That was excellent, clear and well-structured. He smiled. CEO Lee just asked me whether your team's proposal could be used as an internal reference case for their company. Thank you. I accepted the water. It was a team effort. As we talked, not far away, Mickey stood alone near the edge of the corridor. A cup of coffee sat in his hand, barely touched. He stared out the window, lost in thought. Someone walked over to greet him. He turned around with a slight delay, forced a smile, exchanged a few words, and the person soon left. Then he turned back toward the window. His silhouette looked strangely lonely. Romeo followed my gaze for a moment. He said nothing and naturally changed the subject. Which topic interests you most in the afternoon forums? I'd like to hear the one about artificial intelligence applications. I withdrew my gaze and looked at Romeo. Perfect. That's the one I'm planning to attend to. He nodded. Together? Sure. The two of us walked side by side toward another exhibition hall. Neither of us looked back. Chapter 20. Saturday morning. I sat on the floor sorting through old belongings. Most of it was random clutter, old magazines, charging cables I no longer used, and a thick photo album. I picked up the album and casually flipped through it. Page after page revealed mostly landscape photos and group pictures taken during dinners with friends. When I reached the last page, my fingers stopped. It was the backing board from a wedding photograph. The thick cardstock had already begun to yellow around the edges. The photograph itself had long been removed and thrown away, but the backing remained tucked inside the album. Faint traces of adhesive still lingered on the surface, catching the light ever so slightly. In one corner, the name of the wedding photography studio and the date of the shoot were printed in elegant gold script. I remembered that date. It had been unbearably hot. The makeup artist had constantly reapplied powder to my face. Mickey had worn a suit. His bow tie had irritated him all day, but whenever he looked at the camera, his eyes were full of happiness. He had said, "Jessica, we're finally married." I pulled the backing board out and held it in my hand. It had a bit of weight to it. The corners pressed against my fingers. I looked at it for about half a minute. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even nostalgia. It was like looking at something that had belonged to someone else a very long time ago. I released my grip and dropped the backing board into the nearby trash can. My phone rang. It was a message from Romeo, asking whether I'd like to try a newly opened Yunnan restaurant with him that evening. I replied with a simple, Sure. Then I set the phone aside. Once I had finished cleaning up, I stood and walked to the window. The afternoon sunlight was perfect. Warm rays spilled across my face. Below, cars moved steadily along the streets, carrying the ordinary rhythm of everyday life. I watched it all quietly. The man who had once promised to treat me well for the rest of my life was gone. The relationship that had begun with such intensity and ended in complete devastation was finally over. I turned around, picked up my coat and handbag from the sofa, and prepared to leave. As I passed the trash can, I didn't look inside even once. When I reached the door, I stopped. In the entryway mirror, I looked at my own reflection. Softly, but clearly, I said to myself, I know how to play, and I know how to lose. After a brief pause, I opened the door and stepped into the sunlight beyond. Then I added the second half of the sentence. But from now on, the only person I want to beat is myself.